Hello, what's going on? GGTV back with another video, and in this video we are going to be discussing the 10th and final episode of the Netflix limited series Dahmer, or Monster, the Jeffrey Dahmer story, pretty much. Yeah. So this episode's kind of focused on his death sentence, kind of how it went, kind of how it abruptly ended. Obviously, we know, based on history, what happened to Jeffrey Dahmer in prison, but this episode kind of highlights it a little bit. His last words were K. Literally, his last words were K. According to Dahmer, Monster, the Jeffrey Dahmer story, this is how Jeffrey Dahmer, the most infamous serial killer in American history, accepts his fate. Not with a bang, but a murmur. He decides to go out discreetly, kind of like low-key. He's like, okay, I know something bad's going to happen to me. And this is the most fearful we've ever seen Jeffrey Dahmer. And this is probably the most fear he's had in his life right here. Given that this is the tone of voice through which he lived his entire miserable life, it doesn't come as a surprise. But its matter-of-factness is still striking, still somehow more disturbing than if he'd made a big fuss, right? Like him just being like, okay, like he didn't care. He didn't really care that much. He was fearful, but he didn't care anymore. He realized he'd been saved by God, and that's all that mattered through this all, to him anyways. After all he's done, after all he's put people through, when he's finally staring death in the face itself, it's just okay. Obviously these other people, his victims, they cared about their life, but it comes to Jeffrey, and he just makes everything a game. He's just here to stir things up, and it's a very brutal scene. It's probably one of the most. This is a very disturbing episode, and possibly the most disturbing episode of the entire series. To be fair, that's not all he says to Christopher Scarver, who is played by Furley Mack, by the way. That's the actor. Shout out to him. The schizophrenic inmate who, outraged by the racist implications of the murders committed by Dahmer and fellow convict Jesse Anderson, a wife killer who tried to pin the crimes of the proverbial unidentified black males. Believed he had been told by God to kill them in turn. Now, I don't think God would ever tell anyone to kill anybody, but these are his motives, and these are things he had visions of. Like, he had visions of, God telling him to kill this man, Jeffrey Dahmer, one of the most miserable lives I've ever seen. One of the most evil people in American history. When Scarver accuses the beaten down Dahmer of enjoying the pain he'd inflicted on his victims, Dahmer pipes up. I drugged them first so they wouldn't feel anything. He's confessing. He's like, look, I didn't inflict pain on these people. I just wanted to control these people. I never wanted to hurt anybody. Obviously, he killed people, but then it was painless deaths. That's not going to justify anything. I'm not saying it's going to justify anything. Don't twist my words in the comments. I'm just saying, this is his justification. This is what makes his crimes apparently less evil. I don't know. It's really interesting. This is an even more fitting set of final words for writers Ian Brennan, David McMillan, Riley Smith, and Todd Kubrick to put in Dahmer's mouth. Now, I don't think we know exactly what his last words were in the encounter. I don't think Christopher Scarver, during his case, pertaining to actually killing Jeffrey Dahmer, I don't think he revealed too big of details, but the writers decided this is probably how it went, based on Jeffrey's mindset, based on case files, based on interviews. And by the way, there are never before released interviews to the public on Netflix right now, so go check those out. I mean, I'm not promoting this guy, I'm just giving you guys recommendations on Netflix, because I know a lot of you guys are very curious. This happened from 78 to 91. He died literally 9 years before I was born. And he started killing freaking 25 years before I was born. So obviously I had no idea what the exact happenings were. I don't know the exact details, but this is awesome. I really like this series. Because, it goes straight into detail. I was definitely aware of who Jeffrey Dahmer was, for quite some time. I knew who he was, but yeah. Throughout the series, he'd always sought to come up with some mild-mannered explanation of what he'd done, his inability to relate to other human beings, always rendering these attempts awkward, formal, phony-sounding, though there's little indication that Dahmer lied at all after his arrest. He came out and he, confessed to everything. He wasn't really lying about anything, which is something you can admire for a moment, for a split second about this guy, but come on, he's a piece of shit. I don't think there's anything that excused what he did, you know? It's sad, man. Even after being knocked flat by a punch, as his killer-to-be approaches with a metal bar, Jeffrey is still just calmly explaining his methods and rationale, like why he did it. He's going through life so casually. I don't know if it's because he doesn't care about his own life. I said that before. Maybe it is. I don't know. It's kind of hard to interpret. It's kind of an interesting fella because, you know, he wasn't really that accountable. He didn't really ever apologize to anyone, you know, but he did what he did, and he didn't take it back. I don't think he really had any remorse or anything like that, but yeah, Scarver may not have bought into Dahmer's jailhouse conversion to Christianity, but the show appears to argue that Jeffrey himself did. He's like, look, I'm going to change my ways. I'm going to live the rest of my life under God here and help him save me and help me go to heaven and, you know, stuff like that. And there's definitely parallels that they draw with John Wayne Gacy. We will talk about that here in a little bit because obviously it's too important to leave out because these two were doing their killings around the same time as each other in history. So after he is baptized with the approval of the prison chaplain, who agrees with Jeff that the bad guys in the Star Wars movies are more compelling because they're better written, which once again reads like Dahmer preemptively striking against its critics. The part of him who pulls pranks on other inmates, who revels in his fan mail, who makes sick jokes, who attempts to sell his autographs to other prisoners while sweetening the deal with nude selfies sent in by female fans is gone. Like, he realizes he's doing, I mean, the killings himself were wrong, but how he's dealing with it, how he's recuperating from it, how he is recovering from the whole ordeal and trying to better himself, it's not a good way to do it. He's just putting other prisoners down, bringing them into this miserable world of Jeffrey Dahmer, and he realizes that God put him here and he needs to make things right. And, you know, and at the end of the day, I still don't think he quite made things right 100%, but again, you got to kind of credit him for making an attempt at that. You know, as a Christian, you can't really have hatred towards other people, and you got to kind of appreciate like what Jeffrey was trying to do here. Not everyone deserves forgiveness, but everyone gets forgiveness. You know, that's how it is. In its place, we've got a guy who seems truly bummed to be summoned to work detail because it interrupts his private Bible study. Not because he didn't feel like doing the work, but he was so enthused with God and so enthused with the Bible and how he could make things right that, you know. It should be noted here that the show strongly implies that Dahmer's murder was orchestrated by a guard. I mean, who would be surprised that, I mean, the police force was very corrupt back in the day. But in the end, it doesn't matter. Scarver beats Jeff's head to a pulp, once again, pretty graphically compared to the violence we've seen or haven't seen before. Again, this is probably the most disturbing episode of the entire series. Yeah. You know. And I don't know if this actually, did he really get beat the fuck up that violently? I mean, his head was fucking destroyed. Like, you couldn't make out his face. Like, I guess he got beat up that bad. It's really bad, man. It's very graphic. You don't really feel bad for him as a killer, but as just a normal person, a normal citizen walking around the prison, moping around in his sorrows, you feel bad. Did he deserve this? Maybe, but I don't know. This is how Lionel Dahmer finds him when he comes to the prison to see the remains. You know, he says to his son's ruined corpse, he loves him. He loved him since the day he was born. He will love him till the day that he dies. He sobs as he so often has. You know, Lionel Dahmer throughout the series and probably in real life has shown so much emotion towards his son. He actually cares about his son, but there's a lot of things he couldn't really control. And what are we to make of Lionel in the end? His love for his son is, again, genuine, as is the forgiveness he extends to him when Jeff asks during a prison visit. He's like, I will forgive you. His guilt is real, too, obviously. Like, he feels as a human being he needs to be held responsible for his creations, and his son is one of those things. But he's so maddeningly thick in so many other ways, and his obvious peevishness that people feel his book was an attempt to cash in on the pain of the victims' families, and his ongoing battle with his ex-wife Joyce, which culminates in a successful legal quest to prevent her from having his brain examined by abnormalities by researchers. Like, he didn't want his son to be used as an object. He didn't want his brain to be used for further science. Obviously there's a lot of revelations that could have came out of that, and he realizes that, but his son is a monster. Like, he realizes all these things, but he's like, man, we gotta just let him rest in peace, because his life wasn't a peaceful one, right? The bromides he and the judge in the case offer about closure ring hollow. That's true across the board. There's no closure for the group of mothers who gather with Shirley Hughes, though they wind up laughing over a comic book in which Dahmer's depicted battling Jesus, so they kind of have like a way of finding some humor in the whole thing and kind of having some optimism, which is awesome. I mean, them saying they hope Jesus whoops Jeffrey Dahmer's ass, which might happen in heaven, who knows. There's no closure for Sonthon Synthemsophone, who is alone and miserable at his own son's wedding due to his continued thoughts of Dahmer, until his guest Glenda Cleveland manages to cheer him up, which is great. I really like what Glenda Cleveland did. And me saying this in the show pertains to real life. Like, Glenda Cleveland is a great person in real life. Like, she made sure all the victims' families were recovering as smooth as possible. Obviously it's really hard to get past that grieving stage, especially because of the way that their kids died, and that it's not going to be an open casket or anything. Like, they're never going to see their kids again. But yeah. And there's no closure for Glenda either, who tries and fails to persuade the city to build a memorial on the vacant lot where her and Jeff's apartment building once stood. Closing titles tell us no such a memorial has ever been built, before showing the names and faces of all of Dahmer's official victims, which was only right for the show to do that. That was a really beautiful outro. Yeah. Harder to reconcile with the reality is the portrayal of John Wayne Gacy, the prolific serial killer responsible for the deaths of 33 young men and boys that we know of. You don't really cry tears over an unsympathetic portrayal of Gacy, whom even Dahmer recognizes as loathsome for hiding behind Christianity, while denying that he committed any of his murders. Like, Gacy's last words were genuinely "kiss my ass." Like, he didn't have any fucking regret at any of it. He didn't own up to anything. He didn't have remorse for any other human life. Where Jeff, he showed connections with people. Unlike Gacy, the killing we see him commit is graphic and savage, more so than just about anything we've seen Dahmer do up until this point. And that's fine. That's a valid choice for a show about serial killers to make. The decision to portray him in full down regalia during the end stage of the murder, however, is sensationalistic and inaccurate. As best anyone can tell, Gacy only dressed as Pogo the Clown for public performances as such, so maybe the show is a little bit exaggerating things and trying to paint him as a horror villain. That's kind of a flaw of this episode, I would say. A small thing perhaps, but for a show that seemed determined not to depict its titular killer as some sort of kind of supervillain, turned Gacy into a real-life Joker is an uncharacteristic lapse in judgment. But all things considered, it's a small lapse. It's not really a big part of the episode. It serves no purpose. It's just acknowledging that there was another killer on the loose, and this was a very bad period, the 80s and 90s, for crime and for murders and serial killers. Serial killers reign supreme over everyone. People had to lock their doors. People were going missing. Yeah. Ian Brennan, Ryan Murphy, Evan Peters, Niecy Nash, Richard Jenkins, and their collaborators have created one of the most harrowing and most viscerally upsetting television shows ever put on streaming services. And when they finally turn the violence against its primary perpetrator, they make it hurt. They make it hard to look at. Like, you didn't want to watch this scene. Obviously, you hate Jeffrey Dahmer for what he did, but you didn't want to watch that scene, of course. In the end, there's nothing glamorous about this dead man who caused the deaths of so many others, who shuffled and stumbled its way through life, whose presence at the center of a vortex of homophobia, racism, bad policing, bad medicine, bad parenting, and pervasive isolation tells us so much about what this country values and how it rewards those who fail to measure up. So yeah, that's all I have to say about this show. If you haven't watched it, obviously it's a little too late because I pretty much talked about things that happened in the show. But yeah, watch it. I think it's good. Obviously, if you don't like grotesque violence, stuff that actually happened based on true story, like very haunting stuff here. Don't watch it. But it's so interesting to get to some of the finer details we've ever seen in a portrayal here. But leave a like, comment, subscribe. As always, it has been GZTV, reviewing your favorite TV shows out there. I'm Alex, actually GZTV live on Twitch, all lowercase. I'm probably going to do like a Madden grind stream today.